Without a doubt, the hardest thing I have ever done was squatting 500 pounds and running a sub 5-minute mile in the same day. July 2020, I became the second person to do it. And when I say it was the most difficult thing I've ever done, that is against the background of having done some pretty difficult things. Anyway, you're probably wondering how I did it, and we're going to cover that in today's video. So let's set the scene a little bit, and I'm not specifically talking about the sterile background that I'm in here, as it looks like I'm in a police interview having been caught speeding. No, we're actually in our new headquarters, and we haven't decorated the place all that much. So we're currently on some chairs that I bought from TK Maxx and have had at my house for a while. We have lots of space to put up some nice lighting. But the context I'm actually going to be talking about is the context around the 500 pound squat and sub 5-minute mile in the same day. I did just want to address the slightly casting couch setup that I'm currently in here. So for a long time, CrossFit Level 1 in the coaching courses has talked about the ideal CrossFit athlete would be able to squat 500 pounds and run a sub 5-minute mile in the same day. I don't know when it was coined. I think it was around 2006, something like that. And since then, it's always something I've had in my mind as a cool idea to pursue. And over the years, I've done lots of different strength and endurance related challenges. And there was always a part of me that thought, yeah, I think I'd be capable of working towards that. Not really having much of a concept around just quite how fast a sub 5-minute mile was. But in the summer of 2020, I had a race cancelled, as a lot of us did with the pandemic, and it kind of opened me up a little bit to think, you know what, maybe this is the time to do it. My background is in rugby and powerlifting, and I was always best at the squat in terms of the three disciplines. So with the running background that I've picked up as a hybrid athlete over the past couple of years, I thought, let's use my strength in the squat and let's work really, really hard at the track to see if we can make this happen. So I began training with my brother simultaneously. He was training for a 500 pound deadlift and a sub 5-minute mile in the same day. So I guess I started training for this challenge in the first week of June 2020, as on the Wednesday I tested my back squat with the world's biggest grinder of a 220 kilo rep. And for some reason I did it in Olympic lifting shoes, even though all of my low bar back squatting had been done in flats up until that point. Don't really know what I was thinking on that day. Boo, Fergus of 3 years ago, you fool. And on the Saturday of that week, I tested my mile and ran a 5:07. And you might be thinking, wow, you were pretty close from the off, but the 5:07 was on road and I did have a pretty meaty tailwind behind me. So maybe ignorance is bliss in this case, because it gave me the confidence I needed to commit to the challenge, albeit against a background of essentially inaccurate data as to what my mile time was at the time. It's worth mentioning at this point as well that simultaneously Adam Klink in Virginia was also openly training for this as well. So he clearly found a gap in his regular scheduled programming during the pandemic to put this on his radar as well. So it was quite fun to keep an eye on what the team were doing at their end with their training and what we were doing at our end, and sort of what week to week was looking like, and ultimately seeing who was going to be the first person to do it. So as with all things, the reason that I was attracted to the idea behind this challenge was curiosity. I am not a massively competitive person anymore. I get a huge amount of value from the way that I train across strength and endurance disciplines by pushing myself, learning about new things, pushing new horizons from a personal point of view, and improving and sort of adding brick by brick as time goes on. And given there'd been so much talk around the 500 pound squat and sub 5-minute mile in years previously, there was a bit of a discussion in Reddit threads and things online at the time. I was curious, given the sort of predisposition that I had to being good at squatting due to having shorter femurs than your average person, I guess, and also having a running background that I developed over the past couple of years of hybrid training, meant that I thought I was in a pretty good position to give this a go. And there was a part of me that felt that I didn't want to squander that opportunity, and it's as if the stars aligned, because somebody else clearly felt the same way. So I kind of threw my hat in the ring of the game was afoot, smokes pipe and tips hat with moustache. Game is afoot, probably from Sherlock Holmes film. I don't really know why that came into my head, but here we are. And curiosity basically made me feel that I would be doing myself a disservice if I didn't give my all to this. And what I quickly found out was that was exactly what was required. So let's cover off the obvious question: what did my training look like? And I really want to preface this by saying that this was genuinely the hardest thing I've ever done. I was entering the unknown in terms of the speed work, the utter intensity that's required on the track to be able to push towards a 5-minute mile. I've seen forums and threads discussing this conceptually online after the event, and I think there is a bit of a disconnect between the expectation of the difference between a 6-minute mile and a 5-minute mile in terms of the work required to get there, the pain, the speed, and the challenge that goes with it. It caught me by surprise, and the training and preparation that I'm about to run you through was arguably some of the most gut-wrenching stuff I have ever done. But that's where I'm really thankful to have had my brother with me, also having his guts wrenched on a week-by-week basis as he was simultaneously training for the deadlift and the mile, which looked like this deadlift and a 4:53 mile. The prick. He was also 19 years old, so if we can just all pretend he doesn't exist, then that would allow me to sleep better at night. Thank you very much. So I'll break down what a week of training looked like for me at the time, and that is underpinned by the methodology of Omnia Performance, which is myself and Johnny, my coach of 5 years and business partner that's in the office just around the corner behind there. The methodology that underpins all of our programming, all of our training plans, all of our one-to-one coaching athletes and the results that they've had, thousands of them over the years. We have about 1,800 active right now, and there's some principles that underpin why my training looked the way that it did, which are core to Omnia Performance. So we're not going to give too much context on that, so if you have any further queries, just check out the website in the description down below. But let's kick things off, as most of us do, with Monday, which, as it has been for me for many years now, and still is in fact, is heavy lower body in the morning and track works or hard effort running intervals in the evening. That's how things started, but as things progressed, it actually became PM and PM, heavy lower and running, because we obviously wanted to consolidate the demand from my legs from the squat onto the track so that I could become more competent performing under fatigue. That really falls into the category of consolidating stresses, whereby we aim to consolidate the demand from heavy lower body, high intensity lower body stuff with high intensity running into the same training day, so that effectively we're only recovering from it within the context of a week once, which frees us up a little bit more later in the week to focus on other things. With all my training, whatever I'm training for, intensity will peak at the start of the week and bottom out at the end of the week, and volume will peak at the end of the week and bottom out at the start of the week. So those sort of curves invert as the week goes on, and that allows us to monitor the relationship between intensity and volume. So basically, I worked from 220 as a training max, the grinder that you saw before in my Olympic weightlifting shoes, and worked to a progressive periodization plan on the Mondays over a 6-week period with a deload before we then went into sort of giving it a go. And that was pretty consistent, other than the few days where the fatigue from these things was quite unpredictable. The intensity of the track work sometimes meant that my squat work suffered. Sometimes the intensity of the squat work meant that my track work suffered. And that's where curiosity was really the winner here, because it was quite difficult to keep on top of exactly which way round that would be on any training day. Some of you might be thinking, well, why not separate the strength work and the running work into separate days for the sake of quality? And it's a valid question to ask, but this essentially allows us to become competent at performing under fatigue, so compromised running in a sense, but also physiologically adapting to the demand of the squat work and the sprint work. And given that my reps were pretty low with the squats, there wasn't actually too much compromise to my gait going into the sprint work that evening. So Monday was the real key session every week. That was where the most specific work was being done, and then the rest of the week was assistance work focused. So higher rep squat assistance volume, more tempo, sub-threshold, low intensity, steady state, zone 2 aerobic work with my running later on for the rest of the week. And it was kind of a case of focusing on the specific early on, really concentrating that intensity, and then devoting the rest of the week to the specific assistance that was then going to carry over to the progression required within the context and the parameters of that squat periodization cycle and the progressive running demand that came with it, with a few key running sessions that were in the diary ahead of time, one of which fully claimed my soul and we'll come on to. Moving into Tuesday, that was essentially upper body day, and I was doing low rep bench pressing to maintain my strength somewhat there, along with sort of bodybuilding reps and sets. So that was kind of there as a bit of a recovery day from the real punch in the legs that I'd given myself the day before, whilst also maintaining my upper body strength and body composition, to be quite honest. Assistance work on that day was predominantly focused on my upper back, just so there was a bit of low bar squatting specificity, but the volume there was mostly maintenance work rather than anything too progressive. Wednesday would then be a tempo / subthreshold run, and I think these peaked at about 45 minutes at 7 minute per mile pacing. So I was never really pushing it too hard on these. This was essentially just developing my subthreshold capacity and ability to maintain pace over time. And that ultimately allowed me to sort of develop pacing work that was being done on the Monday, bringing up my ability to maintain higher paces over time with the work on the Wednesday to piece it together at the end. So those were pretty simple sessions, to be honest. Occasionally there were some 8x800s at tempo pacing in there. There were some 10x600s, there were 12x400s, things like that. But the stimulus we were looking for with those sessions was all within the sort of zone 3 subthreshold area. So hopefully that makes sense. Again, core component of a lot of the programs that we offer at Omnia Performance, and for the reasons that I've ran you through just now. Thursday was then my squat assistance focus day, which was actually, for the first 4 weeks, horrendous, because it was 120 kilos, 130 kilos, 140 kilos, 150 kilos progressively, with a max rep sets for 3 rounds each week. So I think, yeah, week 1 was 120 kilos for a set of 24 times 3 or something. It was ridiculous. But it did make the movement pattern of the squat exceptionally efficient. It meant that all of the assistance work and the volume that I was doing the rest of the week was specific to the main movement that I was focusing on at the time. There was then some paused front squat work, there's some stiff leg deadlifts, things like that. But that was a hard effort day. Then some face pulls, some upper body work, things like that, just to keep me sort of robust, balanced, bit of injury prevention work, but mainly just being a well-rounded athlete and holding on to things rather than just, like a lot of people do when trying to balance different training goals, abandon certain things for a period of time and then wonder why you're so weak and don't enjoy things when you come back to it. We never want to do that with training. I never want to do that with training. I will always work in some maintenance work on the disciplines that I enjoy doing, so to maintain a base level of proficiency in terms of the skill, the motor patterns, that means that I can seamlessly get back into things whenever my goals shift. Friday was then list run and sort of strides, so predominantly like 15, 20 reps, 100 meters, all sort of at the 5 minute, 5-15 minute per mile pacing. So real decent rest periods there as well, quality focus, just opening up my legs, really drilling that pace so I can get used to what it feels like, and just opening my legs up a little bit more within the context of the week without giving myself another big dosage of intensity. So I wasn't gasping for air on those reps. They were quality of execution focused. There wasn't a specific rest time. It was just there to really drill my gait, the movement pattern, and the pacing that I was looking to execute on the day. Saturday was then my zone 2 work, as it has been for many years, and I was actually training for a 11-day ultra marathon in the Scottish mountains in November simultaneously. So most of my Saturdays were actually spent in the mountains doing 15 to 20k, varied sort of walking aggressively uphill, running the flats, running the downhills, so not as much impact as just running 15 to 20k on the road, but a decent amount of volume. But that was that. Sunday was always focused rest. Nothing, no active recovery jogs at 175 beats per minute like some of you like to put up on Strava, CrossFit, and just eating up and making sure that I was feeling as solid as I could going into another horrendous Monday. So there were a few key sessions along the way that I want to draw attention to, namely my last intensity focused session on the squat, which was 212 for 3 sets of 1 with the aim of moving them as well as I could. This was the last rep on that day and I was pretty pleased with how it moved, but bear in mind, this was all performed under a lot of fatigue. So 212 moving like this on that day is not reflective of my top end strength had I tapered down and peaked for the event, which ultimately meant that 227.5, 501 pounds was there on the day. The session that claimed my soul the most for the mile training and really did make me wonder what on earth I'd signed up to and that I had been an arrogant bastard about even thinking that it was within my wheelhouse was 4x400 meters at 115 per 400 meter lap with 60 seconds rest. Hard work, not awful. 5 minutes rest, and then 4x400 meters at 70 seconds per lap, so 110 per 400 meter lap with 60 seconds rest. And let me tell you, by rep 3 of those 110s, there was no air left. There was plenty of lactic left, and there wasn't much fight left in me as I scrapped my way through those last 2 reps. But I got through it. I saw several deities along the way on the side of the track willing me on as I was borderline hallucinating and gasping for air and reaching for my inhaler. But it meant in my mind, in Johnny's mind, that given that I'd been able to execute that, I'd negative splitted the second round of 400s and held a pace that was above the 5 minute mile pacing with the right taper at this point. the mile was there. And that was the week after I'd done a 5:05 mile in training. So we felt we had all of the information that we needed, theoretically, in terms of training adaptation and physiological capability on paper to do this. The difference there is the human being, which is managing the nerves, managing the execution, making sure that I get my squat warm-ups right, making sure that I actually pull off the right sort of willingness and mentality when it comes to lap 3 of the mile. And that's where things started to get challenging and the self-doubt started to creep in. But that's a brief overview of what the training looks like. I actually have a picture of exactly what my brother's training looked like for the deadlift and mile loosely, which will be on the screen for you just here. This is still on a whiteboard at my parents' house from 2020 as a way of mapping out his training. And annoyingly, he pretty much hit every set, every rep on pace at the right RPE the whole way through. So this was a perfectly planned and executed training program, and you'll be pleased to know that that is essentially what underpins the squat and mile training program that is available on Omnia Performance. So check that out, I reckon. So that's an overview of what a week typically looked like. There were some variations along the way. There were some sessions that I just flat out couldn't hit due to fatigue, and I did often find that a bad week's lifting meant a good week's running and vice versa. So it was really fun to ride that wave of analysis and changing and auto-regulation that went with it. But that is an overview. I'm not going to go into the exact sets and reps that went with it because that would be pretty boring and analytical for us all. But if you do have any questions, drop them in the comments down below as we go. But that was essentially the split that went into pulling this off. So the day itself, how much did that hurt? Well, a lot, obviously. I said that in the opening sequence of this video. So if that question is pursed on your lips right now, I'd ask how you've made it this far. And the anger that you can probably sense rising within me is similar to the anger that I would feel as I was on the floor, gasping for air, having thrown up, with a headache, feeling systemically overloaded, like a sort of limp fish or one of those gas station inflatables that you see in America, because I just had nothing. I am proud to say, and I don't think as many of us, this sounds very arrogant, I don't mean it this way, have earned the right to say this as much as we might think we have, to give it my absolute everything. I fully emptied the tank. I have done that once in my life, and it was in the 4:58 mile that I ran that day. I was destroyed. And with 120 meters to go, if you'd asked me what RPE 10, max effort, nothing left on the table, you have depleted your resources as a human being, Fergus, it was at that point, 120 meters to go. So being able to push through is a massive point of pride for me, but at the time it was an enormous point of pain for me, and that's why it's etched in my memory as the toughest thing I've ever done, because the day, that 120 meters and the period after it was quite incomprehensible in terms of just the total systemic overload that came with it. But if it were easy, then I guess more people would have done it. But it's quite weird to know deep down that if I need to summon it, I can be really proud of myself that I can leave absolutely everything on the table. So at this point, I'm sure I've really sold this to you, and there's an absolute exodus of you leaving your F45 classes, your functional fitness classes, your triathlon training to give this a go. And if you're wondering, well, Fergus, do you have any tips for those of us that would like to work towards this? Then yes, I do. I have 3, in fact. But I do want to be crystal clear, all jokes aside, I highly recommend the curiosity that I had going into this as a driver for you to explore how much you can improve or hold on to your squatting, deadlifting strength alongside working hard towards a mile. A mile is a very, very challenging, unforgiving, but rewarding distance to train for. And whether it's sub 5 or whether it's sub 8, I do not care. Neither is better than the other objectively within an individual context. One is objectively faster, but I wasn't racing anyone but myself. So really, my 4:58 on that day is no better than your 7:58 if your goal was a sub 8-minute mile. So with that in mind, here are 3 things to consider if you would like to improve your squat/deadlift, because there's a lot of similarities, and mile time simultaneously. So the first thing to consider is that less could well be more here. You might be thinking, I need to run X mile, that's going to be really hard work, intensity focused, I need to be doing a lot of intense running. That is the case, but you also need to be aware that you can't recover from high intensity running as you would be able to aerobic stuff. What you need to be doing is focusing on quality of execution, hard effort in the small and correct dosages, and then make the rest of your running training at a lower intensity, higher volume to sort of piece together the puzzle of the adaptation you're looking for. But just because you're training for a specific pace doesn't mean that the way to get there there is to constantly do lots of sessions running at that pace. That is a fast track, torn calves, burning out, regret, pain, suffering, and a very unpredictable arrival to the gym as you unrack a barbell, because you'll be under so much fatigue, your body's not really going to know what it's going to be able to squat that day. So less could well be more. 1 or 2 track sessions a week maximum, focused, high intensity, short volume development sessions, not pounding tarmac, pounding the track each and every day because you think that's going to get you there quicker. It won't. It will get you there slower, or arguably not at all, because you will probably hurt something along the way. So number 1, less is more. Number 2 is specificity, and I refer directly back to the sort of context of the week that I gave you earlier, where I was making most of my assistance work as specific as possible to the movements that I was looking to execute for the goal itself. So as with all training, intentional, focused, specific training is king, consistently executed over time. That is the very non-glamorous, non-sexy, non-sellable thing that really underpins all of fitness development. So at this point, it seems like bad marketing from me as somebody who owns a fitness coaching business, but nonetheless, that is essentially the core behind this. This is hard work, this is honest work, this is quite metric focused work, which means that you need to be as specific as you can about achieving your maximum recoverable volume on a week-to-week basis, and making all of the work that you're doing contribute as much as possible to the goal at hand. Remove the junk mileage, remove the junk volume, remove all of the stuff that is doing nothing for you other than accumulating fatigue rather than actually moving you towards your goal itself. So again, I'm being a bit general here, but it's things like the Metcon full send that you might regularly do on a Friday. Given the increase in fatigue, given the non-specific nature of it for a squat and mile goal, you need to be realistic about what the human body is capable of achieving, and you can't excel at everything all at once. Don't let anyone on the internet tell you that you can do that, because that's unfortunately not the case. But what you can do is turn up certain dials, turn down certain dials, and refine your approach to a specific goal, refine your assistance work, refine your top sets, refine what the week looks like, refine what your sort of weekly split looks like around recovery as well, and focus on that. So for our third and final tip, it is to abandon the ego. And that is something that I mention on this channel alarmingly regularly, but that's because I think it's so important when it comes to hybrid training, which is training to progress in 2 separate sporting disciplines that do not inherently support one another. So squatting, top end heavy squatting, does not inherently support your mile time. Training for a better mile does not inherently support your powerlifting, squatting, therefore hybrid training. So when we are faced with these 2 other ends of the spectrum, we need to abandon our ego to be able to 1, look at the reality of what it's going to take to get there, 2, look at the reality of what we are currently capable of and what we will be capable of getting to within a certain time frame, and 3, how are we going to get there? And with me, the big thing, and one of the biggest things I've always done, is even though I'm a competent coach and athlete myself and program for thousands of other people now, I want to remove the guesswork. I want to remove the second guessing, the human tendency to question things, the human tendency to adjust things, and the human tendency to wonder whether we've done the right thing. So I handed all of my training programming and all of the adjustments that went with it to Johnny, and basically just wanted to remove myself entirely from the process so that I could focus on doing what I was told. That meant that there was a little bit of sacrificial ego, because obviously on some days I had to auto-regulate things, on some days I felt like I had more in me, on some days I felt like I should be doing more. But having somebody analyze the data, reflect on the feedback that you're giving over WhatsApp, whatever it might be, or felt really rough today, or lower back felt lit up, or on rep 3 of my 800s I felt absolutely terrible in my calves, why is that? He started to piece together what things needed to change and how I could get to the end goal as quickly and efficiently as possible. And in doing so, all ego was removed. It was me versus me. I didn't have any expectations on myself other than wanting to progress and do the work required. And I think, especially in hybrid training, the ever popular but ever more convoluted by people that don't actually understand what it means on the internet, it's something that's just essential, because you can't take 100% of one thing, 100% of another, bash them together and operate at 200% output. Doing more is not the solution here. It's doing the right amount with the right execution, in the right intensity, in the right volume, and repeating that over time. Trial and error is a huge part of it, and the only way that you can sort of really be honest with yourself or be honest with a coach is to drop the ego. So whether it's ultra endurance, whether it's triathlon, whether it's strength, whether it's track work, I think the ego is the enemy. Hashtag throw a Ryan Holiday quote in a video, that'll keep the bros happy. And I would recommend that you offset your training to somebody else, because training for something like this is tough, and when you are the one doing the tough stuff, it's easy to second guess yourself. So I would recommend a coach. I'm obviously quite biased in terms of which ones I recommend, but you know what? I probably don't need to plug that again, as at this point you should be quite aware. But fear not, I haven't forgotten about the transatlantic conversation that I alluded to earlier. In the end, Adam Klink out of Virginia did it first. He did it 2 weeks before I did, so my hat is very much tipped to him, and it was great to see that happen at the time with the community out of his CrossFit gym over there. Did it hurt a little bit not being the world's first? A little, but it took a lot of the pressure away in terms of one, knowing that it could be done, and two, knowing that it was entirely just me versus me at this point. I didn't feel like there was anything to prove. I didn't feel competitive, like, oh, let's stick it to, there was none of that stuff. It was just, oh, cool, somebody else has done it first. You're not gonna be the first anymore, but you know what? It'd be pretty cool to be in a very exclusive club nonetheless. So I did my best to remove as much of the pressure going into the actual event itself as I could with that in mind, against that context. So yeah, so that's that. But at this point, it's important to mention that I am currently training for something very similar, and after 3 years, I've foolishly decided to take the hardest thing I've ever done and do it again, because I've clearly forgotten just how horrible it was. I'm training for a 500-pound deadlift and mile under 5 minutes total, something that you might have seen Nick Simmons training for, Ryan Hall, I believe, was training for it as well at some point on the YouTubes. And again, is a very exclusive, very small club. I believe there's only one person to have done it in the past within that sort of context. So it's literally, as you start lifting the bar at the track, the timer starts, and then you have 5 minutes total to lift the barbell and run a mile. So it's a bit logistically challenging as well, but that is currently my training focus. Very confident in the deadlift, working hard towards the mile, and again, riddled with self-doubt, riddled with questioning, handing my programming off to Johnny so I don't need to think about it. And a lot of what I've run through today is the reason that we've brought this video up, because I have reminded myself of all of the things that I have discussed with you all here today. So comment, Fergus, you are a fool. You promised yourself you would not try a sub 5 minute mile ever again, in the comments down below, please. So if you have enjoyed the video, please do drop it a like, please do comment what I've just said down below, as well as any other thoughts, feelings, or questions you have, and obviously hit the subscribe button, because we all want to see a 500-pound deadlift and mile under 5 minutes very soon, don't we? So thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time.